If you want to avoid a C-section, then say no to Pitocin. In fact, Pitocin can actually double the intensity of your contractions and lead to your baby going into distress. Not to mention, it's going to cause you more pain so that you're more likely to ask for the epidural, which in itself can also lead to a C-section. Hi, my name is Carly Bonderud, and this is the Empowered Birth Series where I go deep into everything you need to know to plan and get your empowered true natural birth. And this is season 3, the Cesarean Traps. We are now on Cesarean Trap number 13, which is Pitocin, just as natural birth trap number 13 is also Pitocin. It's no accident that C-sections are more likely to happen with inductions. And while induction itself doesn't automatically guarantee a C-section, nor does Pitocin automatically guarantee a C-section, it does make it more likely. If you've been following me for a while, then you already know the structure of these master classes, and you can probably skip ahead to where I talk about the Cesarean Trap in itself. However, if you're brand new to me, then you need to understand something. This is a deep dive master class where I am really going to go deep into what you need to know about Pitocin when it comes to C-sections. To get the most out of this video, I would suggest that you also familiarize yourself with the Cesarean Traps and the Empowered Birth Method. You can do that easily by going into the playlist on my YouTube channel, the Cesarean Traps, which is again season 3, and watching the first video in that series. That's where I go over the breakdown of what a Cesarean Trap is, how to spot it, and how to avoid it. You also learn more about my 3 paths to empowered birth, which I will touch on here in this masterclass. I always do. And at the same time, if you want the deeper dive, go watch that first video. I'm also going to be referencing other masterclasses that I've already done, including Natural Birth Trap number 13, Pitocin, which does go into the deeper dive. This masterclass is going to be a little bit shorter than other masterclasses because I have already touched on Pitocin, and I'm going to be adding a little bit more information as well. I'm also going to share some additional resources that you will want to check out, including resources that I didn't have access to when I was first doing the episode on Pitocin in season 2. So if you're brand new to me, then make sure you're also checking out the other videos. Make sure you check out the playlists and also check the description of this video. There may be a transcript available. If there's not, there will be in the future. You can also go onto my website, empoweringmomsbirth.com/start guide, and that will give you the overview of what you really need to know about true natural birth and how to get it. Because I believe that every birth can and should be a beautiful and empowering experience. And too often, moms are robbed of their beautiful birth experience because they don't know about Pitocin. They don't know that it's not the same thing as oxytocin, and they don't recognize that when they agree to that Pitocin, or they just assume that the doctor knows better, that actually can lead to a C-section. Okay, so we're just going to dive right into the Cesarean Trap today. So what do you need to know about Pitocin is, first of all, the 2 reasons why it gets administered. The first one is it's being administered to speed up labor. This is called labor augmentation, and that is when they give you Pitocin after your labor has already established itself. Maybe you have early contractions, maybe you are already in labor for a good while and now they want to speed it up. Or maybe you just went into labor on your own before an induction and they decided that they were just going to carry out the Pitocin anyway because they might as well. After all, they were going to do it in the first place and they want to keep things going on schedule. The other possibility is that you are being induced, in which case Pitocin is usually something that they offer. Pitocin also goes by the names oxytocin and syntocinon. So depending on where you live in the world, you may hear something different than Pitocin. It's all the same though. And I'm going to tell you, Pitocin is not oxytocin. It is a synthetic hormone that makes your contractions mimic what you would have with true oxytocin, which is what your body makes, but it does not cross the blood-brain barrier. There are a whole bunch of reasons why you don't want Pitocin. One being, it makes contractions longer, stronger, and more intense, sometimes even double the intensity of what it would be with a physiological birth, than if you had just not had that Pitocin in the first place. You also have it administered through an IV. And if you've been following me for a while, you also understand that the IV is not going to be conducive to a natural birth. The one thing you really need to understand is that Pitocin is taking away your ability to have a physiological birth. When you introduce Pitocin, you are hijacking your hormonal process. You are no longer getting those endorphins that your body would naturally make. You are no longer having those oxytocin receptors that allow you to bond with your baby. It can interfere with breastfeeding and it can interfere with bonding. Not only that, but Pitocin is called the devil's juice for a reason. A lot of moms hate Pitocin. They have had horror stories about Pitocin. The moms who say it wasn't too bad, typically they were going to go into labor on their own, or they were already having a fast labor and they didn't notice the difference. But Pitocin is just not the same thing as oxytocin, and you really do need to understand that. If you want to know more about the reasons why Pitocin can hijack your birth, I do have a lot of resources inside my resource library. I don't typically cite a lot of references in my videos because I want to keep them succinct. And if you do want that deeper dive, you can always reach out to me. hello@empoweringmomsbirth.com. I'm happy to share my research with you. I'll get back to you within 3 to 5 business days. If you're already a newsletter subscriber, then the wait time is a little bit less. You just hit reply to any one of those emails and you'll get response back within 1 to 2 business days. I may even end up putting the reference right into the Empowered Mom Toolkit. That way, since you've asked the question, everyone now gets a chance to read the research. So that's pretty much what I have in the overview. Now let's dive into the reasons why you might not want Pitocin. Okay, so if your goal is to have an unmedicated birth, then Pitocin is going to override that. Because you are no longer experiencing physiological contractions, none of the endorphins that your body is supposed to be producing are actually going to be able to build up in your system for you to be able to withstand the force of those contractions. I'm not saying it's impossible. There are moms who have been able to have an unmedicated birth with Pitocin. However, Pitocin has many risks. It can cause you to have a hyperstimulated uterus, which in itself can also tire you out over time because your uterus is doing double the duty than it was supposed to be doing. This can then cause you to have your labor slow down or stop, which requires them to add more Pitocin, which can then lead to your baby going into distress. This then leads to the C-section. The other thing to consider with Pitocin is that typically what you need to do is make sure that you don't have the highest dose right away. You can sort of taper it off. If you are having an induced labor, then typically they're going to want to run Pitocin, but you can turn it down. Go and check out my other videos about Pitocin to know more, as well as my induction video inside of the Natural Birth Trap series. You will also want to check out 3 different resources. One is Rachel Reed's book, Reclaiming Childbirth as a Rite of Passage, because that goes into interventions versus physiological birth. That will help you understand more about the difference between Pitocin and going into labor spontaneously. Another book that also covers Pitocin is Why Induction Matters by Rachel Reed. This one goes into the ins and outs of Pitocin-induced contractions, and showing you the difference between that and physiological birth. There's also a birth plan available inside of this book for induction so that you can plan ahead. Typically, I wouldn't suggest using Pitocin just to speed up labor that already was established because, you don't really want to rush the process. Anytime you rush a process, you risk losing a lot of the actual integrity of that finished product. As I said, Pitocin does not cross the blood-brain barrier. It blocks oxytocin, and oxytocin is a bonding hormone, which means that if you are injecting Pitocin just to speed up labor and keep it on somebody else's timeline, when you already went into labor on your own, you could end up messing with the process. Etsy Goer mentions in her book Labor Induction, Why, When, and How, in a quote that she took from David Stewart, who said, "When nature does work, it cannot be improved. Technology does not enhance a natural process that is working. It can only mar or destroy it." So understanding that, if you're introducing Pitocin to a physiological birth, you are only going to mar or destroy that birth experience. You're not going to improve on nature. And think about it this way. If you were creating something, maybe a book, and you were rushing the process just to get it done, how much is lost if you're rushing that process? When we take our time with something and we are doing it at a pace that's actually right for us, we tend to do a better job. So the same thing can be said about your labor. If you take your time during labor, it may be less painful for you long term because your uterus is getting breaks. Pitocin tends not to have any of those breaks, which is again why babies tend to go into distress, because of the fact that it squeezes on the baby, can compress the cord, and cause baby not to get very much oxygen. It can also have baby not get in the right position. Yet it's still almost like smacking a ketchup bottle to try to get the ketchup out. So baby is having their head bumped against your cervix, but maybe they needed to turn. Maybe your body needed more time. And by introducing something, one of my dear friends, Samantha St. Louis, also said that it's like putting a brick on a gas pedal with a car with no steering wheel and expecting the car to go in the right direction. You can check out that full video inside of the interviews, which go into the playlist on my YouTube channel, and you'll be able to learn more about what she says about Pitocin because it's quite eye-opening. So when you understand that you don't want to rush the physiological process and you don't want to induce just because your care provider tells you to induce, and you want to make sure that you ask questions, you really need to understand why this is introduced in the first place. Well, the medical perspective is that birth is a disaster waiting to happen, and they see pathology everywhere. So they see a long labor as possibly being a problem. And they also have a quota. They need to fill beds and empty beds. It's not conducive for you to have a very long labor in the hospital. Not to mention that you can get very tired. Baby can go into distress. There can be infections. And the more cervical checks that they do, the more likely you are to get an infection. It's the way that the system is really set up. And because they only see pathology, they think that by introducing Pitocin, they are keeping you on track. If you go into distress, you just have a C-section. And if you have a C-section, they saved your baby. This is the medical mentality. And they only ever see things go wrong, or it worked with the medical interventions. On your side, though, if you are introducing Pitocin, you have contractions one on top of the other. And not only that, but because you are going into labor with these Pitocin-induced contractions, you are not getting that physiological high or that endorphin rush after the baby is out. This can then cause you to hemorrhage because Pitocin has been introduced into your system, it needs to stay in your system, but it can also cause your uterus to become sluggish. So then they need more Pitocin to get that baby out and have the placenta out, and they do active management. So now that you understand the medical model, though, and why they introduced Pitocin and what that actually does, let's talk about the free birth side. The free birth side says never, ever use Pitocin ever because it's an evil, dangerous drug. However, there are reasons why you might want to introduce Pitocin. Say you've been laboring for a while and you're really tired and you've had a bit of a rest and you've had the epidural even, but contractions have completely stopped with the epidural. Pitocin can kick that back into gear. So if you're already having a medicalized birth and you've chosen intervention, Pitocin can speed things up. There is still that risk, though, that you could have a C-section. But, sometimes we need to consider the risk of Pitocin versus the risk of a C-section versus the risk of letting things keep going as they are. And you are your own best expert on that. So how do you make that decision? Well, that is where the empowered birth method really comes in, okay? Because we need to look at those two dichotomies between the natural birth side of things and the medical side of birth. And we need to create that bridge so that you can come to your own best conclusion about what you need. If breastfeeding is incredibly important to you, then you're going to need to know about the fact that Pitocin can interfere with breastfeeding. If that golden hour is important to you, you also need to know that Pitocin can lead to hemorrhage, which means that they're going to have an active management stage of the placenta. You may not be able to get optimal cord clamping, which is when you wait for white. You may also end up having contractions one on top of the other, which means you may choose to have the epidural or other methods of pain relief. Remember that Pitocin is a drug. It is something that is an intervention. This is not just about speeding up your birth or getting labor started. This is a big intervention, and there are many, many ways that it can go wrong. In fact, Jenny herself ended up having some severe reactions to Pitocin when she had it with her first baby, to the point that she now says she's allergic to it because of how it affected her. And other moms have said this as well, that they have adverse reactions to Pitocin. You don't know how Pitocin is going to act on you. So what I would suggest, and you can choose to do this any way you want, but if you are choosing to have Pitocin, you need to know that having a small dose of it will give you more information about what is really appropriate for you or whether you're having an adverse reaction. And better a small dose than a big dose right off the bat. So whenever you are being offered Pitocin, you want to say, okay, if I really want to try this, get the small little sample first. So how to apply this with the empowered birth method, though, because I understand that it can be really stressful, is that first of all, you need to be making this plan in advance. Before you actually go in and get Pitocin, you need to be clear on your red lines in the sand of when you would actually let this happen. Because again, this is a dangerous drug. It can cause hyperstimulation of your uterus, and it can cause distress in your baby. It can also lead to hemorrhage, so you need to be cautious with it. Pitocin belongs in your backup plan. Pitocin does not belong inside of your typical birth plan. So go back and check out the Write Your Empowered Birth Plan mini challenge if you want to know more about how to write your birth plan and create your backup plan. But what you really need to know is that this is something that we are going to put in as a pullback only as much as needed, hard line in the sand when you're going to actually introduce this, because this is one of those big ones. Pitocin, induction, and C-section are all those major interventions that can happen during your labor and your birth process that you would only want to bring in when you feel that it's necessary. Don't go by what the medical system says, because they are used to administering Pitocin. They're used to doing inductions. They're used to doing C-sections. Another one I would say is episiotomy and the assisted delivery with vacuum and forceps. But typically what they do is they do a C-section when baby gets stuck. They don't do as many episiotomies anymore. So understanding that you've got your hard lines in the sand, the next thing you need to do is you need to get past your fear. You have to be able to have those fear release exercises locked down. And one of them is as simple as just breathing. Go and check out the Reset Your Mindset for Empowered Birth Mini Challenge and your Empowered Birth Workshop, which you can just put your name and email in to get access to have those fear release techniques locked down. The reason you want to feel no fear, or at least be able to manage your fear, is because the medical system can and will use your fears against you, either intentionally or unintentionally because of their own biases and their own fears about not doing anything. Remember, the medical system is based on pathology. They only see things go wrong. They don't see free births. And the free birth moms typically have either been traumatized, or they are very medical adverse, or they are informed, but they also are still erring on the side of staying away from the medical system at all costs. There are a few free birth moms like myself who recognize the utility of the medical system and would call that in if needed. However, it's still aim for a physiological birth and pull back only as much as needed. So I'm really coming from the lens of someone who doesn't really employ the medical system unless it's needed. However, I do recognize the utility of it. And if you do need Pitocin, it is helpful to know when that hard line in the sand has been reached and then go from there. So getting past your fear will help you to stay in your truth and keep you with those hard lines in the sand. Because the medical system may say, well, we need to induce you, or we need to speed up your labor. Things are going too long. And that can be really frightening unless you know how to do those quick 5-minute exercises that get you out of your fear. The next level, though, is to get your partner on board. Your partner needs to also know that Pitocin is like putting a brick on a gas pedal of a car with no steering wheel, and you don't want to just do it just because the medical system keeps pushing it on you. So they need to be able to protect you, and it's helpful to also have a doula, because they can also be an extra line of defense. Finally, you need to be able to confidently say no to your care provider. It's not enough to have other people advocate for you. You need to be able to advocate for you. So being able to confidently say no in the face of the opposition of the medical system is incredibly valuable. Again, I don't think that every birth should be a free birth. And I also don't think that every birth should be completely natural. There is a time and a place to use certain tools, and Pitocin is a tool. But we need to have reverence for that tool. It's like a chainsaw, okay? You don't go and take a chainsaw to the shrubbery. You need to use a different tool for that. But in a pinch, if you needed to cut down a tree, a chainsaw is going to be much more effective than an axe or hedge clippers. So understanding that Pitocin is a tool and it has a utility, and we need to have reverence for it, but we don't need to introduce it into every single birth experience. And then recognizing also when we are comfortable using it, not when the medical system is comfortable using it because they're used to using it. When we are comfortable, when you're comfortable using it. So confidently being able to say no and to stand your ground and to recognize that it has a utility, but it may not be right for you is very helpful. And again, if you do choose to use Pitocin, use it in the smallest dose possible. because that is going to help you understand how you're reacting. Some people only need a little tiny bit of Pitocin and it kickstarts their labor. Others need a little bit more. You need to know what is most likely going to be good for you. I react to drugs very intensely. So even Tylenol can make me sleepy and drowsy, and I have a reaction to it. It pretty much numbs me out and I can just go to sleep. But if I don't want to have that feeling of being out of it, I don't take on that drug. So I could guess that Pitocin would probably be really bad for me because of how much it would affect me right away. So understanding again about your tolerance to drugs may also help you to recognize maybe I don't want to do Pitocin, maybe I want to try something else. I mean, there's other ways to bring on the oxytocin high and the oxytocin receptors rather than just going with Pitocin. Nipple stimulation can bring on the oxytocin hormones just the same way. Darkness and sensual touch can also help bring on the oxytocin. The same energy that gets the baby in can get the baby out. Okay, so I've now told you about the risks of Pitocin. I've told you about the dichotomy between natural birth and the medical birth community. I told you about ways in which to consider Pitocin if you really needed it. I told you why it can lead to a C-section. I also told you about the empowered birth method. So let's quickly recap. Why don't you want Pitocin? Because Pitocin is a very, very strong drug. It does not cross the blood-brain barrier. And what it can do is it can basically put your contractions one on top of the other, hyperstimulate your uterus, cause distress for your baby, and even cause postpartum hemorrhage. So you really need to use this drug with reverence. You can't just say, oh yeah, sure, I'll speed up my labor. It doesn't work that way. When you introduce Pitocin, you are no longer having a physiological birth. You are having a medically managed birth. That means that they are going to also want to monitor you. So you're going to be on the continuous electronic fetal monitor because of how easily baby could go into distress from the strength of Pitocin contractions. It's harder to have an unmedicated birth when you are on Pitocin because of the strength of those contractions can be double what they would be if you were having a physiological birth. The other thing that you need to recognize is you're more likely to ask for the epidural. The epidural in itself could slow down your contractions, meaning you're going to need more Pitocin, and that can again lead to the cascade of interventions and distress. If you want to know more about that, again, I would suggest you check out Rachel Reed's book, Why Induction Matters. Hensi Goer's book, Labor Induction, Why, When, and How, also has some information on Pitocin. And I would suggest checking out Rachel Reed's other book, Reclaiming Childbirth as a Rite of Passage. In fact, there's so many references I could get into on Pitocin. There's an article called Pitocin is Not Oxytocin that I can also reference for you. If you do have any questions or you would like access to my reference library, you can always reach out to me, hello@empoweringmomsbirth.com. Because I am happy to serve you. I'm happy to help you with that. Information is free, and I only charge for access to me. So to recap on what you need to do with the empowered birth method, first of all, you need to write your hard lines in the sand of when you would actually agree to Pitocin. Second, you need to get past your fear, train up your partner, and finally, advocate for yourself. And again, if you go and get the Write Your Empowered Birth Plan mini challenge and go through that, that will help you write out your empowered birth plan. I would suggest also going through the Reset Your Mindset for Empowered Birth mini challenge because that will help you get past your fear. And if you would like the full overview, then go and get your Empowered Birth Workshop, which is my signature introductory program. You just put in a name and email. You go to empoweringmomsbirth.com/workshop. If you are someone who would like to have a more natural-minded birth, possibly even a free birth or an unassisted birth inside of the hospital, I would also suggest you getting your Empowered Birth Academy. This is my full self-study VIP program, which basically you're going to get all of the modules that help you to plan and get your empowered birth. I start with giving you the true natural birth roadmap that you're going to want to follow. Then what I do is I help you get past your fear with more advanced fear release techniques. I teach you how to get your partner on board with more advanced techniques to get your partner to support you. And then finally, we finish off with birth advocacy. So this is a more advanced program, and it comes with 2 coaching calls. One is a 15-minute help I'm stuck session that you can call in any time. And then the other one is your 45-minute graduation call. It's almost as good as me coaching you directly for 6 weeks or less. And it's going to make sure that you get your empowered birth, whether you work with me directly or if you just stick with your self-study program. I'm committed to you having an empowered birth, whether you work with me or not, whether you get any of my programs, whether you read my book. Every birth can and should be a beautiful and empowering experience. So now that you know the path and you know what to really expect with Pitocin, I'm just going to give you some additional resources that you'll want to check out as well. First of all, anything that I talk about induction in my videos is pretty much going to also talk about Pitocin. You may want to check out those videos just so that you are aware of your options with induction. Also, I have done interviews in the past with other moms who have had Pitocin, or even people who are in the medical community who understand the risks of Pitocin. So check out the interviews. One that I would say in particular would be Samantha, the Bee Baby mom. She also came on way back in 2021 when I first started empowering moms, and she talks a great deal about the risks of Pitocin. I've also done a natural birth trap series, and trap number 13 in that list as well is Pitocin. So you can go and check that one out. I tell you about things to consider. I tell you about the risks, and ultimately I give you the map for empowered birth with that. So those are the resources that I would suggest you check out. And again, if you have any questions or you'd like access to my larger library, you can always reach out to me, hello@empoweringmomsbirth.com. And either myself or one of my team members will get back to you within 3 to 5 business days. If you are already on the newsletter subscription list, then you just hit reply to any one of those newsletters and I will get back to you within 1 to 2 business days. So that's pretty much all I have for you on that. Thank you so much for watching. Next week, we're going to talk about trap number 14, which is birth on your back. And it's going to be a shorter video again because I've already covered this in the natural birth traps, but we're going to specifically talk about C-section and how I managed to avoid it because I was birthing on my back. And at one point, I did fear that I was going to have a C-section. So I'll tell you that story later. But first, I just want to tell you, if you found value in this video, please like, share, subscribe, pay it forward. A drop in the ocean creates ripples. Many ripples create waves, and enough waves can change the tide. And here at Empowering Moms, I'm all about changing the tide. So whether you're birthing a baby, birthing a business or a creative project or a movement or an impact or a new version of yourself, I'm here to guide you. So thank you again. Have a happy, empowered birth journey, and I will see you next week. Namaste.